All right, so I want you to say the word hemisphere one more time. Now, the Earth can be divided into halves called hemispheres. So if you can see that line right here, it divides the globe in half, and it's called the equator. It's an imaginary line that divides the Earth in half, and it's called the equator. And this is an imaginary line. You're not going to go to this spot, oopsies, and see a line on the ground. It's an imaginary line, but this is another way to describe the relative location of a country. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, okay, there's the equator, how would I describe the relative location of the United States referencing the equator? You could say, okay, well, this hemisphere is called the northern hemisphere up here. It's north. And this hemisphere, you guessed it, is called the southern hemisphere. So the United States is located in the northern hemisphere. So that is a way to use the equator to describe the relative location of the United States. So like I said, not exact. You could say all of North America is in the northern hemisphere. Most of South America is in the southern hemisphere. So you could use this equator that divides the globe into halves, northern and southern hemispheres. You could use it to describe the relative location of the United States. Now, this right here gives you a better view of the northern hemisphere from the top. I did want to show you another imaginary line that divides the Earth, but this time it divides it into two separate hemispheres. This is called the prime meridian. Go ahead and say prime meridian. And this is the imaginary line that divides Earth into the western hemisphere and the eastern hemisphere. So I'm looking at this, and this is just another way to describe the relative location of the United States. You can use the prime meridian and the concept of hemisphere. So I'm going to put my highlighter, my spotlight over the United States, and I want you to think right now, what is one way you could describe the location of the United States using this prime meridian and the concept of hemisphere? Okay. You might have been thinking, well, you could say the United States is west of the prime meridian. You could say the United States is located in the western hemisphere. Those are some things that you could have said. You could say fewer countries are in the western hemisphere than in the eastern hemisphere. So these are some things that geographers will notice, and because you're thinking like a geographer right now, you're coming up with these questions. So as you can see, all these other lines, I'm going to kind of highlight over it. There are a lot of other grid lines over this, and as you can see, when you're walking down the street, you do not notice lines on the ground like this. There are not. These are also imaginary lines, but the lines that go up and down are called lines of longitude. And the lines that go east to west are called lines of latitude. Now, these are lines that can give someone an absolute location. So we've been talking a lot about relative location, and this is absolute location, an exact location. And these sets of lines, they form a global grid, and this is a way to identify absolute locations of places on the Earth. So you might hear the term 32 degrees longitude and 40 degrees latitude, and that will give geographers an exact spot on the Earth. And geographers use these imaginary lines to help describe the location of a place on their surface, the exact location on the Earth's surface.